Right, Power BI has instead returned us from Power Query straight into the report view, and that's not quite where we want to be. Can you remember how to get to the table view? Just take a moment and have a think. Okay, it's this little button on the left-hand side of the screen. Now, as you can see, the data has been brought in from Power Query into the data model. Now, over on the right-hand side of the page, we can see the data pane, and in the data pane, we have a single table, which is called Invoice Dataset. This, of course, is the dataset we have just imported from Power Query. We can see the fields within the dataset by clicking on the little left-hand arrow next to the Invoice Dataset title. You can click on any field in the data pane and Power BI will highlight the field in the table. Now, there's not actually anything to do in this report in the data model. It's kind of too simple for that. We're going to start looking at measures, which are part of the data model, but it is easier to understand how these work using visualizations in the report view. So let's get into the report view. Again, do you remember how to get back to the report view? Take a quick minute, see if you can work it out. It's the little button on the left-hand side above the table view button. Now we're back in the report view, the first thing we're going to do is create our first visualization. Now, because this is our first report, I've chosen pretty much the simplest visualization, the one you're most likely to be able to relate to, the exalted table visualization. To create a visualization, we go to the Visualizations pane on the right-hand side of the report view and select the visualization we want. The table visual is a simple grid icon, and we just need to select it. If you're not sure which visualization it is, hover over the visualizations that look like a table and Power BI will show the name of the visual. We can now see that a placeholder for the table visual has been created in the report view. All we need to do now is add in the data fields that we'd like to show in the table visual. Now, remember that the whole point of Power BI is to aggregate, by which we mean normally sum or add together information in fields of data so that we can get a total for that column or field of data. We can then add in different categories of information into a visual and split out that total by those different categories. Which field to choose though? Ultimately, I'd like to review our spend data by suppliers, cost centers and locations. And the one thing that all those visuals have in common? The invoice spend field. So let's start there and bring that into the visualization. To add in a new field to the visualization, I'll go to the data pane on the far right-hand side of the screen and find the invoice value column. Now, before I bring this into the visual, what are you expecting to happen? What sort of value is Power BI going to return? Is it only going to be one value or lots of values? Take a few seconds, have a quick think, and then I'll bring it in. Okay, to bring it in, what I'm going to do is click on the field and then drag the field into the columns window of the visualizations pane. Right, we get a single value, 69,414,260. Why? Well, here is our first encounter with measures. What we are seeing here is an implicit measure. What's an implicit measure? An implicit measure is an aggregation calculation like a sum or a count that is performed automatically over a field when you put that field into a values window or column window of a visualization. Now, if you know Excel, then probably aggregation functions will be quite familiar to you, but just in case they aren't, then sum is a function, a preloaded command in Power BI that asks Power BI to look at a list of numerical values and then add them together. A count is another function, another preloaded command to Power BI that counts all the rows in a table that have got numerical values in a particular column. Now, if you're not aware of some of the other aggregation functions, then let's have a look at the list. Okay, Here are the various aggregating functions that we'll find in Power BI. They're also pretty similar. In fact, they're exactly the same as the ones you'll find in Excel. There are a couple more, but these are the main ones that we'll use. So we start off with the sum, which adds together numerical values in a selected column. We then have a count, which counts the number of cells in a selected column that contains a numerical value. We've got average, which totals the values of a column, then divides the total by the count of rows. After that, we've got max, which identifies the largest numerical value in a selected column. Finally, the min, which identifies the smallest numerical value in a selected column. Okay, before we started talking about DAX functions, we were talking about implicit measures. And to go back to more simple terms, when we put a field that has numerical values into a visualization, then Power BI automatically totals all the values in that column. That's why it's called an implicit measure, right? Because Power BI creates the calculation without us asking it to. And this totaling calculation is all we're seeing in our visualization. If we were to go back to our initial base data set and then look at the totals row, then we'd see the same number. Feel free, try it if you want to. While Power BI automatically sums numerical value fields, it will count text value fields if you ask it to. Okay, we've now got a good base understanding of implicit measures. Let's quickly format this number, as it's a bit hard to read at the moment with it being so small. Do you remember from pre-course learning where we need to go to format our visualizations? We go to the Visualizations pane and click on the little paintbrush icon. Most visualizations will currently have this setup, where you can format the salient parts of the visual, such as the values, the totals, the column headers, and so on in the visual section, while more general parts of the visual, which will be present in all visuals, you can format in the general section. Now I just want to make the font of the values a little larger so that you guys can see it a bit better. So I'll go to the values option and increase the size of the values up to 16. Now notice here that you can also change colors of fonts, the font itself, the background color, and so on. Now please bear in mind that Power BI has used the Visualizations pane to perform formatting for years, but the layout has changed a couple of times. It's like this now, but there's no guarantee in a year from now that it will still look the same. Okay, now the column title looks a bit silly, so let's increase the font size of that too. Now I need to find the column header section. And then I can increase the font size here as well. I'd also like to add that if you're sharing a screen over Teams and you're not trying to teach students about formatting, they can also use the zoom function in the bottom right-hand corner to enlarge visuals. Well, the next thing I'd like to do is put a border around the visual. The graded border that's currently there is a placeholder and will disappear when I click on the page or move to another visual. So to bring up the border options, we need to go to the general list and then select effects. I can then toggle on the visual border. Now finally, I'd really like the number of 69 million to be separated by commas. Now we don't do that in the visualization pane, we format the column itself. To do that, I'll go back into the data pane, click on the invoice value column. Now we can see that we now have a new floating tab up on top of the ribbon called Column Tools. From here we can format the field so that it will look the same in every visual. We can change the column names here and change its data type, although I wouldn't recommend that as it then creates mismatches with Power Query. We can also format how this column looks as a number, introducing and so adding in commas and changing the rounding. So let's click on the comma to do that. Right, let's go back to our visual. At the moment, all we've got is a total of the invoice value field. And remember, we want a report that shows the invoice value split by geolocation, supplier, and cost center. So what we need to do is somehow spread that invoice value field total over each of those categories. So let's start off with geolocation. Now, the first thing to do to split the total of our invoice values across the different geolocations is to add the location ID field to the visual. I can do that again by dragging the field into the visualizations pane. But of course I now can't see the columns window. To get back to the columns window, I need to click on Build Visual in the visualizations pane. There's my columns window. Right, again, I can go back to location ID and drag it into the columns window. So what's happened here? Let's just widen our visual to have a look. Right, this is another implicit measure that we've formed, or rather Power BI has formed for us. This time though, the location ID has been aggregated as a count rather than a sum. Now, if we were to go back to our base dataset, we would see the total amount of rows at the bottom and it would equal 12,891. It's also not that helpful. Power BI performing an implicit measure here is not what we want. We don't want it to summarize the values in the location ID column. We want to split the invoice value column by those location ID values. So we need the location ID column to not be summarized. To do that, we go to the location ID column in the visualizations pane. And then we select the drop-down arrow. From here, we can see all the different ways that we can summarize this field. You can see it's currently got count selected, but we want don't summarize. So let's select that one. Now we've done that, we've turned off Power BI's need to perform an implicit measure, and instead it summarizes the invoice value field by the different location ID values of 1 to 5 instead. Now this is the first time we're going to see something called filter context, which is where Power BI calculates the same sum implicit measure, but filters the rows that go into that calculation depending on other information in the table. Now, filter context is really important, but don't worry, we're going to go over it a ton in the next few lessons. Now, this visual is then telling us that location ID 3 has spent by far the most money, while IDs 4 and 5 have spent above 10 million. Isn't it annoying though that we can't see the names? We've only got the IDs. That's all we've got in our data set. Now, the last thing to do for this visual is to give it a title. We'll call it something simple like invoice value by location. Now, of course, as we're formatting a visual, we go to the formatting section of the visualizations pane. Then we need to choose between the visual selection of formatting options and the general one. Now, as all visuals can have a title, I'll choose the general one. I'll toggle on the title option. And then click on the arrow to expand the options. Here I can write in my title. I can then increase the size of my font, just like I did for the values of the table. Just because it's a title, I'll also underline it. That's pretty much one visual done. I'm just going to make the visual look a little bit neater. Now we can see all the rows. And now we got rid of the space we don't need. Now the next thing to do is create the next visual, one that splits invoices values by cost centers. We're going to create exactly the same data table, but just swapping cost center for location ID. Now in real life, I would copy and paste the visual that we created and swap out one field for another, but we're learning here, right? We need practice. So let's go through the process. Firstly, I'll just click on the preview screen to stop highlighting the visual that we just created. Then I'm going to select the table icon in the visualizations pane. We then need to populate that table visual. So we want our invoice value, and then we want the cost center name. The formatting now is completely different from the invoice value by location table, so we need to change all of that. We'll go to the formatting section and first go to values. We'll then increase the column headers. And put in a border. We also need a title. We also need to increase the font size of that title and underline it. Okay, there we go. Just need to make it a little bit neater. Okay, the final thing we need to do is sort out the same table but for supplier name. Now this time I'm not going to make you do the visualizations all over again from scratch. We're going to learn how to copy and paste a visual. So how do we copy a visual? Really easy, this one. We left click on the visual that we want to copy and then press Ctrl+C to copy it. Next, press Ctrl+V to paste the copied visual in place. Once the visual is copied, it's a simple matter of changing the fields in the table. Now at the moment, we've got invoice value and cost center name in the column section of the visualizations pane. Now we want to keep invoice value in there as that's the field that we're analyzing, and replace cost center name with supplier name. To do that, of course, I go to the visualizations pane and go back to the build visual option. I'll then click on the little X next to cost center name in the columns window. After that, I'll just drag and drop the supplier name field on top of the invoice value field. There we go, the invoice value column is now being totaled by supplier. Again, Power BI is forming an implicit measure and calculating the same implicit measure in each row of the table. The answers are different because in each cell of the table, Power BI looks through the table it's summing and filters the table to only show rows with the relevant supplier name in each row. This is filter context again, but don't worry, as I said, we'll go through this more in the next few lessons. Now, all we need to do now is change the title. Now, of course, in the visualizations pane, I'll go back to the formatting button. I'll go to General, and then in the title option, I'll change the title. Right, the next thing we need to do is somehow fit all this information on the page. Okay, finally, we're going to have a simple table at the bottom that's essentially going to show the individual invoice details. This will ultimately allow us to check out the details of the first 3 summarizing tables. Again, what we'll do is copy and paste a visual that we already have, and then add in some more information. I'll click on Invoice Value by Supplier, and then press Ctrl+C to copy this visual. I'll then paste the copied visual in place. We're going to need to do a little bit more jiggery-pokery with our visuals, but we'll get to that in a minute. I'm now going to add in every one of the rest of the fields in the dataset, apart from invoice value, supplier reference number, and the cost center number. Okay, we haven't put in yet cost center number, invoice number, or supplier reference. First of all, we need to sort out a couple of things. So first of all, we need to look at the location ID. Once again, we've got an implicit measure here. Power BI is counting the amounts of location IDs, and we don't want that, just like we didn't want it before. So we need to go back and change the location ID so that we're not summarizing that field. To do that, we go back to the Visualizations pane, and then to the Build Visual option. We'll go down to the Count of Location ID field in the Columns window, and then click on the drop-down arrow. We can see that Power BI was automatically creating a count implicit measure, and we want to turn that off, so we'll go to Don't Summarize. Right, we now have the location ID split out into numbers 1 to 5. Now the next thing we're going to do is bring in the cost center number and the supplier reference. Now both of these are numerical value fields, so guess what? Once again, Power BI has automatically summed these columns and put them in the table as totals, calculating each cell depending on the values that are on the same row in the other columns. Again, this is filter context, and again, we'll look at it properly in the next lesson. We don't want this behavior though, as we want this table to show individual line items. So again, we can ask Power BI to unsummarize the totals by, again, going to the Visualizations pane, and then turning off the automatic implicit measure calculations for those 2 fields. Now we also need to look at the invoice date column, as it's a dates column. This really shouldn't be being summed. After all, dates don't get summed. The thing is though that this column is still a number column, and we can tell this because of the sigma symbol next to the column in the data pane. This means that the data type of this column is a whole number, and we need it to be a date. Now we could have changed this in Power Query when we were first transforming the data set, but we didn't for a couple of reasons. Now I wanted to show you early on in the course how to get back into Power Query without using the Get Data button. This allows you to make changes to Power Query code as you go along in the report view. Now I also wanted to prove that data types in Power Query really do matter. If the invoice date field had been formatted as a date data type, we'd be able to segregate the invoices by year, month, quarter, and day, which show the date more clearly, and way in the future, we'd use some more complex date-specific functions. Now with this column formatted as a number data type, we can't do any of that. Now as I said before, we are going to be examining data types in a mite more detail in the next lesson, but let's for the moment hop back into Power Query and start sorting out the change in the data type to the appropriate data type. To do that, I'll go to the ribbon, and then to the Transform Data button. Again, from here, we want to choose the Transform Data option. Right, here we are back in Power Query. We need to find the invoice date column. Now we have the invoice date column's attention, we just need to correct its data type. Pointed on the right track, if you will. There's lots of ways to do this, and we'll start by going to the Transform tab, then selecting the data type option. From here, we can then select the correct data type, which is the date type. Okay, Power Query offers us a new menu, which is basically saying, you're currently on a change type step in the query settings pane. That change type step says that the invoice date should be a whole number data type. You're telling me something different. Do you want me to replace the instruction that invoice date should be a whole number? Or do you want me to keep that instruction and then add a new step underneath? We want to replace the current one. There's no need to add an extra step underneath. Right, that's the job done. We can now see this column is formatted as a date instead of just numbers. Let's see the effect of our little switch in the report view. Something interesting here. We've now got an error. Wonder what's caused that. Let's have a look at the Fix This button in the visual we were just creating. Let's explain what happened there. Let's go over to the invoice date column. Oh, it's disappeared. That's interesting. Right. What happened here is that we had asked Power BI to sum the invoice date column when it was a number. We then came back into the report view, but Power BI thought we were still asking it to sum the invoice date column. We didn't really want that though, but Power BI can't sum dates. So instead, it created an error message on the invoice date field in the visualizations pane. That meant that the whole visual then failed. To get rid of it, we clicked on Fix This, and that meant that Power BI said, okay, I'll just take out the field that's causing the problem. I'll take out the implicit measure that's causing the problem, which it did. And we've now lost the invoice date column from our columns window in the visualizations pane. However, Power BI should now work if we try and drag the invoice date field back into the columns window of the visualizations pane. It knows not to try and sum it this time. Now we're talking. We've lost the implicit measure summing the invoice date number, but instead we've got some dates of sorts in here. It does look a bit odd though, and that's because Power BI automatically brings in the individual parts that a date is made of. We can see here then a day column, a month column, quarter, and year. And this is our first sight of Power BI using hierarchies, where a field of information can be divided into subcategories of higher and higher detail or granularities. Definitely don't worry about that at the moment. Now, if we would rather just have a date column rather than these additional hierarchical columns, then we can do that. And it's very similar to the way that we change the aggregation type. We go to the visualizations pane, and then to the invoice dates field. Click on the drop down, and we can see at the moment there's a little tick next to date hierarchy. We want to get rid of that and put it onto invoice date instead. There we go. We've now got our invoice date in our table.